What if I told you that some of the most terrifying horror films ever made are gathering dust in the forgotten corners of cinema history? While everyone's talking about the latest jump scare franchise, there's a treasure trove of genuinely disturbing films from the 1960s that most horror fans have never even heard of. Film Part 18, Spider Baby, 1967. We're kicking off with what might be the strangest family drama ever committed to film. Spider Baby tells the story of the Mary family, who suffer from a genetic condition that causes them to regress mentally and develop homicidal tendencies as they age. What makes this film absolutely unforgettable isn't just its bizarre premise. It's how director Jack Hill manages to make you genuinely care about these characters while simultaneously being terrified of them. The film has this dark fairy tale quality that's both whimsical and deeply disturbing. Lon Chaney Jr. gives one of his final great performances as Bruno, the caretaker trying to protect the family from the outside world. But it's the child actors who really sell horror here. They play their roles with such innocent enthusiasm that when violence comes, it hits like a sledgehammer. The film was actually shot in 1964, but didn't get released until 1967 due to the production company going bankrupt. Maybe that's why it feels so ahead of its time. It's got this proto-slasher sensibility mixed with genuine pathos that wouldn't become common until the 1970s. Film Dome 17, Burn, Witch, Burn, 1962. Here's a film that takes the tired "my wife is a witch" premise and turns it into genuinely unsettling psychological horror. Peter Wingard plays a psychology professor who discovers his wife has been practicing witchcraft to advance his career. What starts as his rational attempt to debunk superstition quickly turns into a nightmare when everything starts going wrong after he destroys her protective charms. The film brilliantly plays with the question of whether witchcraft is real, or if we're just watching a man's guilt and paranoia destroy his life. The British setting adds this layer of repressed social tension that American horror of the era often lacked. There's something about the way these characters maintain their polite facades, even as supernatural chaos erupts around them, that makes everything feel more unnerving. The final act features some of the most effective supernatural sequences of the decade. Without spoiling anything, let's just say the film's climax involves a children's carnival that will make you never look at fun houses the same way again. Film Part 16, The Premature Burial, 1962. Leave it to Roger Corman to take humanity's most primal fear and turn it into 81 minutes of pure claustrophobic terror. Ray Milland plays a man so terrified of being buried alive that he designs elaborate safety devices for his future tomb, which, of course, completely backfire. This film understands that the most effective horror comes from fears we all share. Everyone has had that moment of panic, thinking about being trapped somewhere with no escape. Corman and writer Charles Beaumont take that universal anxiety and craft an entire nightmare around it. What makes The Premature Burial special among Corman's Poe adaptations is how it gets inside the protagonist's head. The film becomes this fever dream of paranoia, where you're never quite sure what's real and what's the product of a mind consumed by terror. The production design deserves special mention here. The various coffins and burial devices look genuinely disturbing, like medieval torture devices disguised as safety equipment. There's one sequence involving a bell system that will have you holding your breath until you pass out. Film Daba 15, Night of the Eagle, 1962. Also known as Burn Witch Burn in some markets. Yes, there were two films with similar titles in 1962, because the 60s were weird like that. This British horror gem focuses on a psychology professor whose wife practices witchcraft to protect their social status. What makes this film work is how it grounds supernatural horror in very real social anxieties. The academic setting feels authentic, with all the petty jealousies and career pressures that come with university life. When witchcraft enters the picture, it doesn't feel like fantasy. It feels like a desperate response to very real problems. Peter Wingard's performance is particularly strong here. He plays the rational skeptic perfectly, making his gradual acceptance of the supernatural feel earned rather than forced. Janet Blair matches him as his wife, bringing depth to what could have been a stereotypical, mysterious woman role. The film's exploration of belief systems feels surprisingly modern, It's not really about whether witchcraft is real, it's about what happens when rational people are pushed beyond the limits of their worldview. Film number 14, Whatever Happened to Baby Jane, 1962. Now we're getting into the psychological horror that would define the decade. Bette Davis and Joan Crawford's legendary feud translates into one of the most uncomfortable viewing experiences ever committed to film. Davis plays Baby Jane Hudson, a former child star who torments her wheelchair-bound sister Blanche, played by Crawford. What makes this film so disturbing isn't the physical abuse, it's the psychological warfare between two women trapped by their past. The film works on multiple levels. On the surface, it's a horror story about sibling rivalry taken to murderous extremes. But dig deeper, and it becomes a meditation on fame, aging, and how the entertainment industry destroys the people it creates. Davis's performance is fearless. She makes Baby Jane simultaneously pathetic and terrifying, a character so lost in her own delusions that she becomes genuinely dangerous. The makeup work here is incredible. Davis looks like a grotesque parody of a child star, which is exactly what the character needs to be. The film spawned an entire subgenre of hagsploitation films, but none of the imitators captured the genuine psychological horror of the original. Film number 13, Hush, Hush, Sweet Charlotte, 1964. Robert Aldrich followed up Baby Jane with this Southern Gothic nightmare that proves lightning can strike twice. Bette Davis returns as Charlotte Hollis, a woman haunted by a decades-old murder that may or may not have been her fault. The film has this incredible atmosphere of decay and madness. The Southern setting adds layers of social tension and family secrets that make everything feel more oppressive. The mansion where most of the action takes place becomes a character itself, this crumbling monument to a family's dark past. What makes Sweet Charlotte special is how it plays with audience expectations. If you've seen Baby Jane, you think you know where this is going, but Aldrich and writer Henry Farrell keep pulling the rug out from under you. Olivia de Havilland joins the cast as Charlotte's cousin, and her performance is a masterclass in manipulative psychology. Without spoiling anything, let's just say that not everyone in this film is who they appear to be. The violence in this film is surprisingly brutal for 1964. There's a decapitation scene that still packs a punch today, and the film's exploration of gaslighting feels decades ahead of its time. Film number 12, Targets, 1968. Peter Bogdanovich's directorial debut is a film that shouldn't exist. It was made because Roger Corman had Boris Karloff under contract for 2 more days, and some leftover footage from The Terror. What Bogdanovich created was one of the most chilling examinations of modern American violence ever made. The film follows 2 parallel stories: an aging horror actor, Karloff playing a version of himself, who feels his gothic monsters are no longer relevant, and a clean-cut young man who becomes a sniper. The 2 stories converge at a drive-in movie theater in a climax that's both thrilling and deeply unsettling. What makes Targets so effective is how ordinary the killer is. This isn't a monster or a madman. It's just a regular guy who decides to start shooting people. In 1968, this kind of random violence felt shocking. Today, it feels prophetic. Karloff's performance adds a layer of meta-commentary that elevates the entire film. He's essentially playing out the end of classical horror, acknowledging that real-world violence has made movie monsters seem quaint by comparison. The film's low budget actually works in its favor. The realistic, almost documentary-style approach makes everything feel more immediate and threatening. Film Off 11. The Bird with the Crystal Plumage, 1970. Okay, this technically just misses our 1960s cutoff, but Dario Argento's directorial debut is so influenced by 60s filmmaking that it belongs in this conversation. This is the film that launched the giallo genre and proved that Italian horror could be just as sophisticated as anything coming out of Hollywood. Tony Musanti plays an American writer in Rome who witnesses an attempted murder and becomes obsessed with solving the case. What starts as a straightforward thriller quickly becomes a maze of red herrings, artistic imagery, and genuinely shocking violence. Argento's visual style is immediately apparent here. Every shot is composed like a work of art, and the film's use of color and shadow creates this dreamlike atmosphere that makes everything feel slightly unreal. The mystery is genuinely clever, with clues hidden in plain sight that most viewers will miss on first viewing. The film rewards multiple viewings in a way that most horror films don't. The violence is stylized but effective. Argento understands that the anticipation of violence is often more powerful than the violence itself, though when the kills come, they're memorable. Film number 10, Dead of Night Segments, 1960s remakes. The original Dead of Night from 1945 was a masterpiece of anthology horror, but the 1960s saw several attempts to recapture that magic. While none quite matched the original, films like The House That Dripped Blood and various TV adaptations created some genuinely unsettling moments. What makes these anthology films work is their variety. Just when you get comfortable with one type of horror, the film switches gears completely. You might go from a ghost story to a vampire tale to psychological horror, all in the same movie. The best segments understand that less is more. They build atmosphere through suggestion and implication rather than explicit scares. The famous doll segment from various versions remains one of the most effective pieces of horror ever filmed. These films also served as training grounds for future horror directors. Many filmmakers cut their teeth on anthology segments before moving on to feature films. Film número 9, Anibaba, 1964. Japanese horror was doing things in the 1960s that Western cinema wouldn't attempt for decades. Anibaba tells the story of two women who survive by killing lost samurai and selling their equipment until jealousy and supernatural forces complicate their arrangement. The film is set almost entirely in a field of tall grass that becomes a character itself. Director Kenido Shindo uses the landscape to create this sense of isolation and primal fear that's unlike anything in Western horror. What makes Anibaba so effective is how it blends psychological and supernatural horror. The women's relationship is complex and believable, so when supernatural elements enter the story, they feel like natural extensions of the character's emotional states. The mask sequence is absolutely unforgettable. Without spoiling it, let's just say it involves one of the most disturbing reveals in horror cinema. The image will burn itself into your brain and stay there. The film's exploration of female sexuality and violence was groundbreaking for its time, and still feels provocative today. It's a film that trusts its audience to handle complex, morally ambiguous characters. Film number 8, Quidon, 1965. Masaki Kobayashi's anthology of Japanese ghost stories is as much art film as horror movie, but the scares are genuine and unforgettable. Each segment is based on stories by Lafcadio Hearn and presents a different type of supernatural encounter. The film's visual style is incredible. Shot in vibrant Technicolor, it looks like a series of paintings come to life. The artificial sets and stylized performances create this otherworldly atmosphere that makes everything feel like a dream. The Woman of the Snow segment is particularly effective, telling the story of a man who encounters a snow spirit and promises never to speak of it. The way the story unfolds over decades creates this sense of inevitable doom that's incredibly powerful. Hoichi the Earless is probably the most famous segment, featuring a blind musician who becomes caught between the living and the dead. The sequence where Buddhist sutras are painted on his body to make him invisible to ghosts is both beautiful and terrifying. At nearly 3 hours long, Quidon is an investment, but it's one that pays off with some of the most haunting imagery ever captured on film. Film number 7, The Face of Another, 1966. Hiroshi Teshigahara's psychological horror film explores identity and human nature through the story of a man whose face is destroyed in an industrial accident. When he receives a realistic mask, he uses it to seduce his own wife and explore the darker aspects of human behavior. This is horror that works on a philosophical level. The film asks questions about what makes us who we are and whether our appearance determines our behavior. The protagonist's gradual transformation from victim to predator is disturbing precisely because it feels believable. The mask itself becomes a character in the film. It's realistic enough to fool people, but artificial enough to remind us that something isn't right. The uncanny valley effect creates this constant sense of unease. Teshigahara's visual style is incredibly striking. The film is shot in stark black and white with unusual angles and compositions that make everything feel slightly off-kilter. The apartment where much of the action takes place feels like a psychological maze. The film's exploration of modern alienation feels decades ahead of its time. It's a horror film about losing your identity in an increasingly artificial world. Film numero 6, Black Sunday, 1960. Mario Bava's directorial debut is a masterpiece of gothic horror that launched both his career and that of horror icon Barbara Steele. The film tells the story of a witch who returns from the dead to seek revenge on her descendants. What makes Black Sunday special is Bava's incredible visual style. Shot in gorgeous black and white, every frame looks like a gothic painting. The use of shadows and light creates this dreamlike atmosphere that makes the supernatural elements feel believable. Barbara Steele's performance is iconic. She plays both the evil witch Asa and her innocent descendant Katia, creating this duality that drives the entire film. Her eyes are incredibly expressive. She can convey more with a look than most actors can, with pages of dialogue. The film's opening sequence, featuring the execution of the witch, is incredibly brutal for 1960. The imagery of the spiked mask being hammered onto Steele's face is unforgettable and sets the tone for everything that follows. Bava's use of color in key moments, particularly the blood, creates these striking visual contrasts that enhance the horror. The film influenced generations of Italian horror directors and established many of the visual conventions of Gothic horror. Film number 5, The Pit and the Pendulum, 1961. Roger Corman's Edgar Allan Poe adaptations were a high point of 1960s horror, and The Pit and the Pendulum might be the best of them. Vincent Price plays Nicholas Medina, a man driven to madness by his wife's apparent death and the dark history of his family's Spanish Inquisition past. Price's performance is incredible here. He starts as a sympathetic widower and gradually transforms into something genuinely frightening. The way he modulates his voice and physical presence throughout the film shows why he became synonymous with sophisticated horror. The film's production design is spectacular for its budget. The torture chamber set pieces are genuinely impressive, and the titular pendulum sequence is a masterclass in building suspense. Corman uses every trick in the book to make you feel the blade getting closer and closer. What makes the film work beyond the surface scares is its exploration of guilt and family legacy. The sins of the father literally come back to haunt the son, and the film's twist ending recontextualizes everything that came before. The film's use of color is particularly effective. The reds and oranges of the torture chamber create this hellish atmosphere that contrasts beautifully with the cooler tones of the rest of the castle. Film number 4, The Haunting, 1963. Robert Wise's adaptation of Shirley Jackson's novel is often cited as one of the greatest horror films ever made, and for good reason. The film follows a group of people investigating supernatural phenomena at Hill House, focusing particularly on Eleanor Lance, a repressed woman who may or may not be losing her mind. What makes The Haunting so effective is what it doesn't show. There are no visible ghosts, no gore, no jump scares in the modern sense. Instead, the film creates terror through sound design, camera angles, and psychological suggestion. Julie Harris's performance as Eleanor is heartbreaking and terrifying. She makes Eleanor's gradual breakdown feel completely believable, so you're never sure if the supernatural events are real or products of her deteriorating mental state. The sound design deserves special mention. The way voices echo through the house, the unexplained pounding on walls, the whispered conversations, it all creates this sense that Hill House is alive and aware of its inhabitants. The film's exploration of repressed sexuality and social isolation feels incredibly modern. Eleanor's desire for acceptance and belonging makes her both sympathetic and tragic, which makes the horror more effective. Film number 3, The Innocence, 1961. Jack Clayton's adaptation of Henry James's The Turn of the Screw is a masterpiece of ambiguous horror. Deborah Kerr plays a governess who believes the children in her care are being influenced by the ghosts of their previous caretakers. The film's black and white cinematography is absolutely stunning. Freddie Francis creates these incredible compositions that use light and shadow to suggest supernatural presence. The way ghosts appear and disappear in reflections and at the edges of the frame is incredibly effective. What makes The Innocence so disturbing is its ambiguity. You're never entirely sure if the ghosts are real or if the governess is having a breakdown. The children's behavior is genuinely unsettling. They seem to know things they shouldn't, but their innocence makes their knowledge even more disturbing. Deborah Kerr's performance anchors the entire film. She makes the governess's growing obsession feel believable and tragic. Her final confrontation with young Miles is one of the most intense sequences in horror cinema. The film's exploration of childhood innocence and corruption feels incredibly sophisticated. It suggests that sometimes the most terrifying thing is not knowing whether evil is real or imagined. Film number 2. Carnival of Souls, 1962. Herc Harvey's low-budget masterpiece proves that great horror doesn't need expensive effects or big-name stars. The film follows Candice Hilligoss as Mary Henry, a woman who may or may not have died in a car accident and finds herself drawn to an abandoned carnival pavilion. What makes Carnival of Souls so effective is its dreamlike atmosphere. The film has this otherworldly quality that makes you question what's real from the very beginning. The abandoned locations and minimalist approach create a sense of isolation that's incredibly powerful. Hilligoss's performance is perfectly calibrated. She plays Mary as someone who's emotionally disconnected from the world around her, which makes her gradual realization of her situation more impactful. The film's use of sound is incredible. The absence of traditional horror music makes everything feel more unsettling. When the organ music does appear, it's incredibly effective because it feels otherworldly rather than artificially scary. The Carnival Pavilion itself is an incredible location. It feels like a place where reality breaks down, somewhere between the world of the living and the dead. The final dance sequence is one of the most haunting images ever captured on film. Film number 1. Hour of the Wolf, 1968. Ingmar Bergman's psychological horror film is the most disturbing entry on our list because it gets inside your head and stays there. Max von Sydow plays an artist who retreats to an island with his wife, where his sanity gradually deteriorates under the influence of mysterious local residents. What makes Hour of the Wolf so effective is how it blends psychological realism with supernatural imagery. Bergman creates this atmosphere where you're never sure what's real and what's the product of a mind in crisis. The film's exploration of artistic creativity and mental illness feels incredibly authentic. Von Sydow's artist is someone whose sensitivity to the world around him becomes a liability, making him vulnerable to forces he can't understand or control. The demons in the film are some of the most unsettling characters ever created. They feel like psychological projections made manifest, representations of fears and anxieties that take on lives of their own. Bergman's direction is incredibly precise. He uses long takes and minimal cuts to create this sense of mounting tension. The film's pace is deliberately slow, which makes the moments of horror more impactful when they come. These 18 films represent a golden age of horror that we may never see again. They were made by filmmakers who understood that the most effective horror comes from the things we can't see, can't understand, and can't escape from. What makes these films special is their respect for the audience's intelligence. They don't explain everything, they don't provide easy answers, and they're not afraid to leave you uncomfortable long after the credits roll. In an age of formulaic horror franchises and jump scare factories, these films remind us what the genre is capable of when it's firing on all cylinders. They prove that horror can be art, that scares can be sophisticated, and that the best monsters are often the ones that live inside our own heads. So, the next time you're scrolling through streaming services looking for something genuinely scary, skip the latest sequel and seek out one of these forgotten gems. Your nightmares will thank you. Don't forget to like this video if it introduces you to some new films, subscribe for more deep dives into cinema's forgotten corners, and let me know in the comments which of these films you're brave enough to watch first. Until next time, keep the lights on.